Alright, hello everyone, my name is Sen, and welcome to my retrospective of Spider-Man Miles Morales. Before we get into the meat of things, I feel it's important to share a couple of things with you. My retrospective of Insomniac's first Spider-Man title was spurred from a dissatisfaction from a few things that stuck with me on my second playthrough of the title. A large portion of my frustration was surrounding Yuri's corruption in the wrap-up side mission of the Silver Lining DLC. My rating of The Last of Us Part 1 centered around the embers of hype, bolstering my expectations of the title's delivery of the story to such ridiculous heights. My rating of The Last of Us Part 2 stemmed from the lack of the public ability to give this game a chance and to let its writing speak for itself. Adding to this, I wanted a chance to figure out my own thoughts and feelings, and this is the best way I know how. Writing about this game was exhausting.
I spent the better part of a year writing about The Last of Us Part 2.
I even ended up writing a full retrospective for Halo Combat Evolved, only to end up scrapping it because I didn't want to spend a full video talking about how much I no longer like this game and how it does not hold up to me. Moving back to Miles Morales, I told myself I was going to write about it around the time of its release, but it's taken a full year for me to actually get to this point. In part, my hand is forced with the announcement of Spider-Man's newest title in the Insomniac line of games. Naturally, I would probably want to write about this game as well. To be quite honest with you, upon finishing my first playthrough of Spider-Man Miles Morales, I was not convinced that I was going to write about this game. At the time of writing this, I'm currently about 50% through my second playthrough and I'm working on platinuming this title.
In the beginning of my second playthrough, I was actually struggling to find the motivation to continue playing this game again.
That by no means is the fault of the game. To be frank, I'm just not the type of person that values multiple playthroughs when it comes to video games.
It's actually pretty normal for me to write about a game based on my only playthrough of whatever I was going through at the time. However, the added benefit of a second playthrough is well worth it just to keep my thoughts and feelings a bit more fresh and to even create new ideas. Naturally, by speaking on this game, I'll also be drawing some comparisons with Insomniac's first title. With all that being said, welcome to Crouch Block and my retrospective of Spider-Man Miles Morales.
Hadouken!
My usual structure for these videos involves rating the game in the beginning, and upon finishing my first playthrough, I would have likely given this game an 8 out of 10. But as it stands currently, I just don't feel comfortable giving a score.
Gotta say, I'm disappointed, bud.
Krieger.
Yeah. See, Miss Mason? Kinda knew she was gonna be a handful. But you. I guess I was hoping that you and me would see eye to eye.
Where are we?
You're behind the curtain, bud.
What is a important trait or character feature for Spider-Man to possess? And on this, I mean to define him. What character trait or feature defines Spider-Man?
So, the funny thing is, like, the first thing that came to my mind is, like, you know, his courage, but I actually don't think that's, like, the one trait that defines Spider-Man, because, I mean, like, any superhero you could, like, say is, like, you know, courageous. My second instinct would say, like, probably his, for the lack of a better word, playfulness. Like, you know, he's a superhero that can be very serious when he wants to be, you know, like, if he really needs to, like, you know, take matters into his own hands, like, so be it. But for the most part, the most defining thing about Spider-Man, and one of the reasons why I like Spider-Man as a superhero so much, is the fact that he doesn't take it, like, super serious all the time. You know, he has fun with what he does.
I thought you'd quit after last night.
Why would I quit? I said I'd fight for my home. I meant it.
You could have died.
Our family doesn't give up. You know that.
Now, apart from my introductions and whatever my writing would be on this game, poor or not, the first place we get started as far as digging into the actual meat of the game is the graphics and visuals. but I can't help but to feel inclined to talk a bit on the audio design as well.
Anything valuable about this game visually could likely be covered in Spider-Man Peter Parker. Spider-Man Miles Morales takes place in New York City, as does the first title. Personally, I'm not fond of sequels that take place within the same space. When this is the case, sharing a location makes the title typically feel a bit uninspired and a little dry. You already know the location. There's no excitement in the exploration because you likely got that out of your system in whatever game came before. With this being said, I don't feel like it's a huge issue here. When you're driving in a car speeding off to your destination, it's quick and efficient. If your destination is close by, you'll get there in no time, but instead if you choose to walk, ride a skateboard or a bike, you get that much more time to soak in your surroundings and find places or things you otherwise might not have. I hope you all can see where I'm going with this. Being Spider-Man is being in the car times 10. The movement in this game is so quick and fluid, only enhanced and improved further by skills gained and the player's ability. With all this together, you'll be flying across New York in no time flat. It's more than understandable if you didn't explore every nook and cranny of New York. In fact, hats off to anyone that did accomplish this feat back in its first title. One of the first things you notice when it comes to this title is its personality, even down to the music that's presented to us in the title screen. In the first game, Peter is dressed as Spider-Man, sticking to the side of a building, presumably high above and apart from society, while Miles is dressed in his street attire, which yes is supposed to be a transitionary piece to put you into gameplay seamlessly, but also shows himself entangled with his community and really being a part of it. In my retrospective of Spider-Man Peter Parker, the world to me felt rather lifeless. Like there was nothing going on in the city apart from crimes or story events. One counterpoint I could think of was the Halloween party. To be honest with you, I just don't remember. Miles Morales takes on the same formula, but feels like it does at least slightly better. I think this is due to things you interact with in your missions. The music is not some generic orchestral superhero music, it has personality, and the fact that it's in this game would infer that it's probably music Miles would actually listen to. The segment in this game that felt so full of life was actually the Rally for Real Morales' campaign. There's music, people are dancing, vendors, beautiful and festive lighting, and it's all packed with people. It's moments like these that make a place feel alive. Following up more on the graphical side of things, this game doesn't visually do anything more for me than Spider-Man Peter Parker. The graphical fidelity, yes, does in fact appear more polished and a bit sharper, but there's no way this game could really do anything more than that. The enhancements in the visuals of this game could also just be boiled down to the fact that I'm using different hardware to play this game. Back when I played the first game, I was still running a base model PS4. This is not a flex, but I would like to think playing on a PS5, Miles Morales, yes, would naturally look a bit sharper and be a bit more crisp. If this game wanted to look dramatically better, it would have to abandon the look of the original game. Doing this, in turn, would make things feel a bit out of place. One of the things I do want to talk about in this game is Peter Parker. This is not the Peter I was playing as when I played the first game. Comparing these two models side by side,
It's more than a little noticeable that these are different character models. I wish there was a way to alleviate this by giving the player an option to actually pick which character model they wanted to use. The main reason this isn't a huge deal to, I would say, anyone would be the fact that Peter spends most of the game with his mask on for the little time you do see him.
I'm serious. You were never supposed to get caught. Krieger broke our deal.
You want it back in the family, and that's the best you could do?
I saved your life
You threw me in a cell!
to protect you.
Like this is protecting me?
Damn it, Miles! I'm not gonna lose you too.
And I'm not gonna let people die just to save my skin.
What do you think about Spider-Man caught on? Do you think it was really just the I can relate to this guy aspect of it?
I think there were a lot of reasons. I think perhaps the main reason was the I can relate to him. Because he was shy, he wasn't that successful with girls, he had to worry about his family. I think most teenagers reading it thought to themselves, hey, that could be me, you know. So there certainly was that identification.
So, I'm going to say this is especially true with Peter Parker, but I feel like all the different versions of Spider-Man kind of have like this key thing, and it kind of comes off of how Stanley created him. I think the way we kind of really analyze characters or think about what makes a character, you know, themselves is usually how they deal with conflict. throughout all stories, like no matter comic books or otherwise, we always kind of look at the situations they're in. We kind of judge their decision making, and I think a good example is Batman. And I know we're going to talk about Spider-Man, but I just want to bring Batman as like a preface to like how I approach this thought. And so, when you think about Batman, you know, I am the darkness, I'm justice, you know, all that. But the truth is, when you really look at him, he's honestly just a kid, like a giant kid in a bat suit who's struggling with loss. And like a big thing is, he kind of is at the point where he understands he's never going to get past it.
It doesn't mean I don't care anymore. I don't want to let you down, honest, but it just doesn't hurt so bad anymore. You can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city. They can hire more cops. Let someone else take the risk. But it's different now. Please. I need it to be different now. I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
With Spider-Man, the way I really think about how he is defined as a character, and any Spider-Man, but specifically Peter, is he is defined by helplessness.
That right there is kind of, without even telling you where I was going with this whole kind of idea personally. Like, I'm gonna speak my piece on this part as well, but like, sacrifice is definitely one of the major like components that make Spider-Man in my head. Quick side question.
Yeah.
When you see Spider-Man, when you hear Spider-Man in your head, who do you see and who do you hear?
I hear Peter Parker.
Okay, what?
Teenage Peter Parker.
Okay,
always.
like, is there a voice actor in mind? Is there...
I will let you know right now, it is, if we're talking about a voice actor, the one that makes the most sense to me is Tobey Maguire, because out of all the this sounds weird, but he's the most pathetic. And like, so, I mean, he did the job great. He's a great dude. I don't mean that. I mean more of just
the meekness of him as Peter.
Yeah, not like a body thing. Just the way he portrayed Peter was like, you know, he's even when he like got. I mean, this is a big thing I want to bring up too. Is, and I'll go into it a little bit, but he, despite having all this power, is ultimately helpless, and that's what I'm gonna go into it real quick. So by helplessness, I mean his inability to accomplish any of his goals smoothly. I mean, mans cannot catch a break. Like, first of all, his work-life balance is fucking miserable.
Let me just say, I love that we are like 100% on the same page right now, because you are speaking, maybe not the words directly from my head, but you are definitely on the same railroad I am.
I'm sure we are.
That sounded like sarcastic. You're an asshole.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sure we're basically on the same page. But like, so his work-life balance is miserable. And this is the biggest thing. No matter what age Peter is, he constantly has to make decisions that make him decide between the people he loves, his own individual goals, and the overall greater good. At the end of these decisions, no matter what the result is, in some way or another, he takes a hit from it, whether it be to his relationship, to his goals, or to mental state. And I want to point out, I did not put the greater good in there. Peter always, in the end, decides to put the greater good above all else. Others, when faced in this situation, mostly couldn't function, and that's a big thing I think Superior Spider-Man went over, because, spoiler alert, in Superior Spider-Man, Doc Ock takes over Peter's body for a while, and he decides to be Spider-Man, and he is taking control of everything, and he creates all these new ways to make saving the city a lot more efficient, and like, he's just killing it. He's honestly killing it. But finally, when the choice came around to choose between the greater good and his girlfriend, he couldn't make the choice. So he decided to relinquish his control of Peter's body back to him, and while doing that, that's when he admitted that Peter was the superior Spider-Man.
You show up just now, willing to use the last few minutes of your life to save mine? Save the man who took everything from you? That is illogical, preposterous, and completely heroic. In a way I realize I never could be. I have been a fool. You, Peter Parker, were always the superior Spider-Man.
I think one of the first things to state relating the story is that this game is not an origin story. This one is. If we were to take a look at Into the Spider-Verse, it's a story about Miles stepping up and being his own Spider-Man. If this game is going to show some of Miles' first steps, and Peter's entangled with that, it's naturally going to be a story based around identity. The goal here for Miles is to not just be Spider-Man, but to be a good one. This is only ever reflected in stumbles that are in cutscenes. The player did not make these mistakes, they were just weaved into the story presented to us. The first moments of being Spider-Man, you're talking with Peter about the transfer of villains to a holding facility called the Raft. Apart from setting up a clear objective for the player, it's also used as a sort of credence for the first game's events. It shows that something happened here. Now, because the story is one of identity, there has to be stumbles. Due to Miles' overeagernness to prove himself, he makes some mistakes in the pursuit of resecuring the Rhino that ultimately ends up in him escaping a little quicker. These stumbles have to come across clearly as a failure. If these are not re-established or even presented well enough the first time to establish a form of greenness, then the alleged payoff will be cheapened. I understand why this next scene happens. This is Spider-Man Miles Morales. It's a story centered around and about Miles. It just feels so strange that Peter has to leave. Listen, I understand that you can't have a security blanket in the shape of Peter to bail Miles out of all his problems. Peter has to go on a sort of business trip thing with Mary Jane, which leaves Miles on his own. Why this feels so strange to me is that Miles is still rather green as reflected by the story. Maybe the moment where Miles takes down Rhino is enough for Peter to quiet his conscience, but it still feels wildly irresponsible on the side of Peter. But it also does a bit of a job at hinging on Miles living in the shadow of Peter. Some very easy dots for Miles to connect would be, he was doing this all when he was a teenager, and I can't even do it by myself now. Or with help.
No. MJ's headed overseas for the Bugle and requested me as her photographer. Kind of a working vacation for us.
Oh, man. Look, I don't know if I'm ready to fly solo. I screwed up today big time with the helicopter.
But then you delivered big time. You saved my bacon, Miles.
I got lucky.
Hey, I did this gig for 8 years without backup, and you better believe I screwed up lots of times. But that is how you learn.
Speaking on Rhino, I think during your fight with the Rhino, the obstacle-like trail when you're riding on the back of Rhino is a pretty interesting way to spice up the gameplay. But it's only ever used this one time to remix things. I think it would have been more valuable if we got more segments like this. Not all the time, but just to keep things fresh. With this being said, this section reminded me of the Warthog rides in Crash Bandicoot. Another point tacked on to community, but I feel the use of Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man app is extremely smart. It's a good way to characterize your side missions and not just be side missions. I find this extremely clever, much like the train pass Uncle Aaron gives to Miles to contextualize fast travel. I think the use of the app to interweave us further with community is extremely proactive in my eyes. If you want to be a hero, you should make it efficient. It's hard for me to say if the side missions in Miles Morales are more or less involved with the community, but they definitely are involved. Missions with Teo and his cat, getting a stolen car back from an overworked EMT, helping fix a crane by breaking all the ice off said crane and rebalancing it, and we get to save some pigeons again. I think it's more than natural that as Spider-Man, our side missions would be entangled with the community. You're a hero. It might just be the fact that these are all coming from an application adds an extra human-like element to things. Doubling back to Miles a bit, I'm really not sure how long Miles has been doing the whole Spider-Man thing, but if the goal is to not just be Spider-Man but be a good one, this is not reflected in gameplay. I know this is talked about a lot, but if you take a look at Miles Morales movie again, you can see that Miles is sloppy and not fluid, and even part of that is shown down to the animation of a lower frame rate for Miles while Spider-Man is fluid. Miles' greenness should be reflected in some part of the gameplay. It is only ever shown in cutscenes. If he is failing and making mistakes, it is that much more powerful if we make those mistakes. Adding upon Miles being able to learn from Peter secondhand, this takes full effect in the hollow missions that Peter has spread across for Miles. These are here to make sure that you are a fluid, competent Spider-Man. The variety in these hollow missions are stealth, swinging, and combat. This also lists all the mechanical functions of being Spider-Man. I think one of the most interesting things about the story is that some of the main things opposing Miles is not some superpowered mess of a villain,
They're all things close to him to some capacity. Starting things off is the new form plotline surrounding the pursuit of a not-so-clean, not-so-safe energy source with Simon Krieger. This is the thing that is the most distant from Miles, but nevertheless still close to him in some indirect way. If the goal of Miles is to establish himself within the community, whether this is with or without a mask, something destroying the community is obviously going to disrupt that. Secondly is his relationship with Finn. Finn obviously means a lot to Miles. She's his best friend, and they really made this known with all the flashbacks. With Finn, I feel like they did a poor job making us care about her. I feel like we spend more time with her as the Tinkerer rather than her as Finn. This section of the story truly takes a hit due to lack of comparative playtime. I'm pretty sure by the time you're finished with Miles Morales, you are about halfway through the original game. This just means less time, in the case of this game, build up the relationship with Miles and Finn, and instead we get left with a whole lot of remembering. Having the Tinkerer be Finn is great motivation to save her from the path she's going down. A lot of the times it contextualizes Miles' relationship with Finn through flashback sequences to show their history. The problem with Finn is the same problem with Martin Lee. We don't see her along her way of being corrupted, we just kind of see it unfold before us. With this being said, Finn feels redeemable, and she is redeemable. Another problem is we still see Martin Lee actively doing good, even though he is Mr. Negative. All we have as far as Finn is concerned is memories. We don't know if that's the same person. The last close connection to Miles is Uncle Aaron. The relationship with his uncle feels so strange to me. If you're familiar with any sort of writing for Miles, there is usually some sort of tie to his uncle being the Prowler. It's a key note to hit when telling the story of Miles. When you see him in Spider-Verse, he's just a straight-up bad guy. Right up until he figures out Miles is underneath the mask, he seems ready to kill Spider-Man. There's nothing redeemable about him other than his relationship with Miles. Other than knowing the history that he was a bad guy, remove all that around Aaron Davis, and he just seems like a good guy that got burned. He helps Miles every step of the way. He talks casually with Miles about basketball or making music, what his brother was like when he was younger. You wouldn't fully get the idea he's a bad guy at all.
Let Krieger and the Tinkerer kill each other. Go back to being Spider-Man when the heat dies down.
And what? Just hide down here? I don't get to pick and choose when I'm Spider-Man. I gotta stop Finn.
No, you gotta survive. I've been trying to teach you that, but you don't listen.
You want me to survive so bad? Why sell me out to Krieger?
Wasn't a sellout.
Yeah.
I'm serious. You were never supposed to get caught. Krieger broke our deal.
You want it back in the family, and that's the best you could do?
I saved your life.
You threw me in a cell!
To protect you!
Like this is protecting me?
Damn it, Miles! I'm not gonna lose you too!
From the perspective of Peter Parker as Spider-Man, he's usually a character of constant sacrifices. He sacrifices social, family, and dating life to be Spider-Man. He can't keep a steady job, his schoolwork is impeded due to this. In the Insomniac title, he got evicted. Peter, as a character, can't catch a break. I don't feel these same things or stresses or pressures going up against Miles. The closest thing conflicting with him being Spider-Man is his relationship with his mother, but it's not like he has anything going on with school. Miles doesn't have a girlfriend or a job. He has Feast, but at this current point in time, he's actually on break from Feast. There's no struggle other than the events going on in this game. I will say, yes, I'm sure this is all a bit more than stressful, but as it stands right now, this version of Miles Morales is not giving anything up. He's not sacrificing anything to be Spider-Man. In the first game, Peter is struggling to make things work with his relationship with Mary Jane, struggling to make things work with his job with Otto, can't make his rent, so he ends up having to couch surf with his complicated relationship status with Mary Jane. His relationship with his mentor is tested because he loses himself along the way. He believes Martin Lee is a good person only to lose a good social figure to his own revenge against Norman Osborn. Peter has to live with the fact that he could have saved one of the most important people in his life, but he had to let her die to do the right thing. Miles doesn't have to make these hard choices. There simply is less going on with Miles, which makes it a little harder to invest in him. He's just not quite as relatable as Peter, which is fine. You don't need to be a tragic character to be a good character. The toughest thing at this point is that one of his dearest friends have lost themselves. The same way he could have lost himself if it wasn't for Peter. There is a certain duality between Finn and Miles. It could have just as easily been Miles in Finn's position. It makes me feel pain that they didn't do anything with Martin Lee or Norman Osborn because it would have been such an incredible peg to hinge as part of the story. Imagine a sequence, whether it be a flashback or not, that would have Miles confront either of these people and have Miles choose to take the high road and be the bigger person. I think this would have been a great piece, a great segment in all this, but it was simply the wrapping up of the first game that took this avenue and story out of the equation. It feels like they just kind of dropped the ball when it came to thinking of Miles in the first game. I'm going to wrap this segment up by saying that the relationship that they build with Finn between flashbacks, time capsules, and actual time with the character built to these final moments. Identity, community, these are all most prominent themes within the story, and in the final moments they become resolved with the community standing by and identifying with Miles. He is their Spider-Man. They protect him in the only way they could, and I think this is more than an amazing set piece to close out the story.
He's so young.
Hey, get out of here, kid. We'll take care of them.
Did you see his face?
You did good, Spider-Man.
Thanks.
Who is he?
That guy? He's our Spider-Man.
After everything was done, I had some time to sit with my thoughts and continue to assess how I felt about this game. I still think this game is good and worth your time. The first thought that came to my mind was actually, why does this game feel like DLC? It just didn't come across as considered as the first game. I really couldn't place it, and the best answer that I could find was that so much of the game is the same, which leads you into feeling like you're just playing a watered-down version of the first game. I mean, what does DLC actually do? They usually keep things relatively the same while also adding in one or two different game mechanics to focus on for the majority of your playtime. In this case, that mechanic is the Venom and invisibility. My second question ended up being, does Miles feel motivated or obligated to be Spider-Man? To be frank, I'm not sure how to best explain this question, but it feels that way because the only person that he can relate to himself is Spider-Man. Due to this, it could feel this way because Miles could think his only path is to become Spider-Man. Does that make sense? I would have enjoyed some darker moments with Miles. Not him killing or brutalizing anyone, but maybe hovering that line. As I said, I would have loved a moment where Miles and Martin Lee got to interact with one another. It's not necessarily off the table with the next game being around the corner. As far as questioning Miles' motivation, he lost his father who was a police officer while he was doing his job trying to protect the good people of New York. Miles looked up to his dad like a hero, and that brought out the hero in him. And while tragedy doesn't seep from every corner of Miles' character, tragedy doesn't fall short on his life either. He lost his father, he's losing his best friend in this game. His mother got hurt trying to stand up for what she believed in, and his Uncle Aaron ends up not being the person he thought he was. After all that, I think this was a stupid question. Miles is extremely motivated. So, what are you left with? You're left with a solid story. One of Insomniac's greatest strengths is their ability to write a story that makes you care about what's going on. I think Finn is a fine enough scapegoat for this. A very brief reassessment, but we actually do spend a somewhat significant amount of time with Finn as Finn. But there's still a lot of remembering going on with flashbacks, general reminiscing of her and his dialogue, and the time capsules you find. I would have appreciated a mention of Finn in the first title. As much as I feel at home in the combat that resembles Arkham, I'm very tired of talking about it. The combat is well suited to the game, and they do just enough to keep things fresh with Miles' power set, but more than anything, they make it feel as if life's problems can be solved with the Venom Striker too. While I would say the world feels more alive than the first game, we're still playing within the same space, which also undermines that exact feeling. And finally, while this game was worthwhile to play through, I don't know if I'll ever play it again. Thank you all so much for watching. This has taken me more than a significant amount of time. If you'd like to support me, it would be greatly appreciated if you could share it in any capacity. And if you feel like going above and beyond, I also have a Patreon as well as another channel and a Twitch. Thank you all again. I'll see you later. Peace.